Hey guys, this is AI Gaming 1776, and today I'm going to be doing something different. I'm going to talk to you about a topic that is considered controversial, but I ask you to stick with me and give this a chance. I'm going to try to have an earnest and very honest and hopefully constructive conversation with you. The topic is diversity in video games. Now, what has spurred this topic is The Witcher 3 came out this year. I'm recording this in June of 2015. And the game has gotten pretty good scores. It's gotten perfect tens. It's been called a masterpiece. And you would think that after 2014, when we had, quite honestly, a lot of disappointments when it came to AAA video games, you would think that having a masterpiece delivered in the early half of the year, no less, would be something that we're all happy about. But there's a lot of people that are not happy, and they feel the game quite basically has too many Caucasians, that the world is too white, the characters are too white, and there hasn't been sensitivity to care about the needs or the considerations of people of color. I didn't choose the term people of color. Torek Musa from Polygon. I don't know if he's from Polygon, but I know he writes at least one article that's been published on Polygon. Um, Torek Musa used the term people of color. So that is going to be the focus of this conversation: diversity, inclusion, video games. And I know that this is not a comfortable topic, but I really am trying to have a rational and level headed discussion. I'm not trying to fling mud. I'm not trying to confirm any biases. I'm trying to hopefully add perspective that might help the conversation. First of all, I have to point out, if you want to know where I stand, you don't have to test me. I'll just tell you, I support diversity. I just do not care about the color of my protagonist. I do not care about the colors of the people in the world of the game that I play. I care about game systems and mechanics and gameplay and things like that. If Nintendo wants to reboot Super Mario Brothers to be a pair of Middle Eastern cybernetic transgendered cousins who are also philosophy students, I don't care. As long as it plays like a Mario game, it might actually be an improvement because it would be different. We've done the Italian plumber thing in the Mushroom Kingdom for 30 years. So maybe it'd be good. So I support diversity 100% full stop. I do not care about such things. Just so you know, I have never felt like I can relate to any character in a video game. I really mean that. And I don't feel like I relate to many characters in movies, and I don't feel like I relate to many musical acts. It's hard to explain, but just because a lot of the media, a lot of movies, a lot of books, a lot of fiction, a lot of video games, just because they're populated with Caucasians does not mean that I relate to them. They say beauty is only skin deep. Well, I would say relatability based on skin color is only skin deep. Just because protagonists in game worlds are typically white does not mean that I've related to them, because I often do not, and I often have not. Especially when we're talking about games like Far Cry 3. People talked about that game and said, oh, it's a white guy going and causing havoc in a white American going and causing havoc in this island full of people of color. And I didn't relate to that character. I really didn't. I don't relate to many game characters. I play Far Cry because I like the game systems. That's what it comes down to. I like the open world. Far Cry is basically like Skyrim and Call of Duty had a baby. And that's why I like it. Skyrim and Call of Duty are popular games. And then when they have a baby, that's a popular game too. So I never related to the characters. They're psychopaths. How could I relate to psychopaths that murder people for hours on end? Murder thousands of people during the course of the game. I don't relate to that. Just because they're white doesn't mean that I feel any better. But with that said, I would still play a game regardless of the skin color of the protagonist. And it's a shame, really, because so much of these conversations have come down to the skin color. They really have. I've tried to be sensitive and I've tried to read about them. Two articles in particular that kind of inspired me to record this were written by self-identified authors of color. One was at Giant Bomb by Austin Walker. The other was at Polygon by Tariq Musa. And I closed my web browser, so I don't have the titles or even the headlines of those articles in front of me right now. But I can put links in the description box because I intend to have a video with this. Wherever you hear this, whether it's on my website or it is on my YouTube channel, I'll have links to their stories. So, with that said, if you want to know where I stand, I support diversity, I support inclusion. I will play as a transgender, a homosexual, a male, a female, a Caucasian, a robot. I don't care. A person of color does not matter to me. So, with that out of the way, let's talk about some of the arguments, or we'll just say discussion points that Austin Walker and Tariq Musa brought up in their articles. Reading these articles, my takeaway is that both men are very concerned about matters of skin color. Tariq Musa went so far as to say that he is often forced to play as a white person in video games. And he kind of has a point in the sense that most protagonists happen to be Caucasian. But I think that happens more for a practical reason than anything that he outlines in his post. I don't want to misconstrue his words, so please read his article. I'll put a link to it. But I think he has, I would say the reason why we have more Caucasian protagonists than any other kind of protagonist you could choose, I think it's a practical thing. And I don't think it's what he says it is. So please read his words. I don't want to misconstrue them. But I think it really comes down to practicality. Most AAA games these days are Western games. They just are. Western developers, even if they have Japanese publishers, they still often have Western developers behind them. Most of these AAA games, whether it's Tomb Raider or it's Call of Duty, Skyrim, you pick a game and usually it's Western. And I think it's easier for a Western company to tell an authentic and organic story about Caucasians, whether that's right or wrong, than it is for them to do it for other cultures, other skin colors, because it's not just a palette swap. That's the thing. That's the thing. You see, Assassin's Creed Unity came under fire because it didn't have female protagonists. Well, it's not a simple matter of putting breasts on the character and longer hair. You have to think about things like mannerisms, dialect, voice, motivations. If you write a female character in this day and age, you better be super careful to make sure that that character isn't perceived as sexist. Now, maybe the writer and the developer never meant to be sexist at all. But believe me, they can still be crucified as sexist, whether they meant to or not. And it could be because they got mannerisms wrong, because they got wardrobe wrong. The same thing goes when you talk about skin color. It's not just a palette swap. You can't just change the skin color on a character. If you're going to do it right, and you're going to do it organically, and you're going to do it respectfully and sensitively, then you have to have the mannerisms. You have to have the voice. You have to have the dialect. You have to have proper motivations for the character. You can't just palette swap to a female character or a black character or a Middle Eastern character. It's not going to be authentic. And as a matter of fact, it could do more harm than good. So I don't think people realize that. So how can we have that authentic and organic experience that people deserve? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, what's going to need to happen is more countries and more cultures are going to have to open their own game development studios. It's that simple. When I was in the military, I made friends with people who were from all over the world. And it's very surprising to think that the United States military has people straight from foreign countries right into our armed services, but we do. And I met people from Cameroon, from Puerto Rico, from Brazil, from a lot of places that I wouldn't have thought of. And let's take Cameroon for an example. I had a friend from Cameroon, and he spoke a certain way, and he had a certain philosophy, and he had a certain thought process, and I greatly admired him. He was older than me at the time, and he knew a lot of things, to be honest with you. He was a very wise and intelligent person. And his look on life was so different than any other perspective on life that I'd been introduced to at that point, because he's from Cameroon. And how much of that do you see on TV today or ever? And I could write a video game character. I could write a game. I could develop a game, and I could try, because I knew this person, I could try to write a character that supposedly is from Cameroon or a place like it. But I would not be able to make it authentic. People from Cameroon would have to do that. They would have to open their own development studio. They would have to do that. People from Saudi Arabia would have to do that. People from Iran would have to do that. People from Venezuela would have to do that. People from Chile would have to do that. People from Singapore would have to do that. If it's going to be organic and it's going to be authentic, it almost has to come from those countries. You see, people think it's so easy, but it's not. It's not so easy to just make a protagonist female or to make a protagonist a different race, because it is not a palette swap. People are not interchangeable. And that authenticity matters. It really does. You're actually doing a disservice to people if you just basically ask for a palette swap. And I don't care how many experts CD Projekt Red hires, I don't think they can properly do Middle Eastern characters or African characters or Asian characters or any other characters that you want to name. The Witcher 3 got 10 out of 10 from a lot of sites. I don't know what the Metacritic score is. I'm sure it's high. But they stuck with what they know. Whether that's right or wrong, are they terrible, horrible monsters because what they know is Caucasian people? I don't know. I don't want to pass that judgment. But the game was authentic because they stuck with what they know. And if you really want there to be diversity in gaming, then you need diversity in developers. Now, how do you achieve that? I don't know. The terrible, awful truth of it is a lot of the world doesn't work the way that you want it to. It doesn't work the way that you think it should. It doesn't work the way that you probably think it does. Let's take Iran for an example. Let's say an Iranian game development studio came out, and you're hoping that the game that they put out will give you the authentic Iranian experience. Well, here's the problem. In Iran, people get in trouble for making YouTube videos that the government disagrees with. Now, what if they try to make a video game that the government disagrees with? On top of that, what if they try to make a video game where the protagonist is a homosexual? And they try to make this game in Iran and publish this game in Iran. It's quite possible that, I don't know. I don't live in Iran. I can't prove it one way or the other. But my hunch, based on other things that I've seen, is that the Iranian government would not like that. I don't think they would let it fly. And that's the thing that you have to understand is a lot. If you want authenticity in games, if you want people of color, and again, we're talking about real human beings, not just palette swaps, not just skin color palette swaps. If you want an authentic experience to happen, it almost has to come from the countries that you want represented for it to truly be authentic. But then a lot of those countries would not allow this type of content to be made in the first place. So I don't want to be insulting. I really don't. I've been trying to have a productive tone in this recording here. I'm trying to have a productive conversation. But the most diplomatic way I can say it is the things that you're asking for are not as easy to achieve as you believe they are. And it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot to get what you want. Now, I think it's fair to want it. And, you can have expatriates, expats, or however you say it, from other countries come to Western Development Studios and maybe be big brothered in some kind of taken under a wing situation to where they're based in Canada or the United States or Europe or any country that's going to allow them to make the kind of games that you want to see. Maybe that way it would work. But the bottom line is we're talking about human beings. We're not talking about palette swaps. We're not talking about, oh, let's just put breasts on the character. Now it's a woman. Let's just change the skin tone. Now it's an African. Now it's a Tasmanian. That's not how it works. So let me look at some other points because I got off script, if I'm honest with you. Let me look on some other points. I think it pretty much summed up what I was going to say. I had probably 4 or 5 main points that I wanted to make for this conversation, and I kind of melded them all into one bowl of spaghetti. But I do want to say this. I want to leave you with this. In Torek Moose's piece on Polygon, he said, well, what he did was he read quotes from presumably white people that don't want to have to play as characters that are not white. I say presumably for a reason. First of all, this is the internet. I can go on the internet, and if we're just talking about typing, I can pretend that I'm black. I can pretend that I'm Albanian. I can pretend that I'm Swiss. I can pretend that I'm Mexican. I can pretend that I'm anything. But even if it really is white people who he is quoting, and if they really are white and they really are saying that they don't want to play as non-white characters in video games, him choosing their quotes is cherry picking. We can cherry pick anything to confirm our biases. If we did a real poll, if we could conduct a real scientific poll of all the white people on the planet, I'm pretty sure most of them do not care what color the protagonist is. The protagonist in the Crisis games is black. In the Crisis games, people have criticized them, but at the same time, the Crisis games have been used as examples of what is the most cutting, bleeding edge game. And maybe you can find examples, maybe you can cherry pick examples where people didn't like the game because they had to play as a black guy. But I really honestly think that would be in this super small minority. I just do. I don't think most white people would mind being a protagonist of a different color or a different sex. I just don't think they would. So before I go, I do want to touch on a couple more points and then I'll be done. One is going to be short and simple, where I ask, when will there be enough diversity? Because if The Witcher 3 did have enough people of color in it, and they did do it properly, and they did it authentically, and they did it in a sensitive manner that was fair to everyone, and they handled that part of the situation, my question is, would other groups, would other minorities have the right to still be unhappy? Would they have the right to say, hey, wait a minute. Okay, so there were people of color in the game, but what about transgenders? What about homosexuals? What about gypsies? What about any group that you can think of? When does it end? I think that's a very important question to ask. When has a game been sensitive enough? I think when you do sandbox games like Saints Row or Skyrim or any of the Bethesda games, it is kind of easy to address everybody because it's a sandbox game and the protagonist is really just an empty suit. But when you do a game like The Witcher, and especially remember it's based on books, but when you do a game like The Witcher or any kind of game like Lara Croft Tomb Raider, when you do a game where the protagonist is a very specific character with a very specific heritage, how do you satisfy all groups? I don't know that you can. As a male, I'm forced to play as a female when I play Tomb Raider. I just am, because that is the story that Crystal Dynamics has chosen to tell. The story of a female. And if I want to play that game, dare I say, I have to respect that. They had the right to choose to make it about a female, and I wanted to play it again because I liked the gameplay mechanics in Tomb Raider 2013. So if I want to play it, I almost have to respect the fact that I'm playing as a female. So again, the question comes, when has there been enough diversity? The Witcher 3 could have had people of color in it, but then I think it still may have been accused of not being diverse enough. Now, let me touch this. This will be the last topic that I go on about. Torek Musa, and I think Austin Walker also talked about it. The fact that racism was talked about in The Witcher 3, but it was done with elves and dwarves. And I don't know about Austin Walker. I don't want to put words in his mouth. I only read his article once. I read Torek Musa's a couple times. So again, I don't want to misconstrue anyone's words. But Torek Musa in particular said that choosing to use elves and dwarves to discuss racism actually dehumanizes people of color. And I strongly disagree. I disagree from the highest of mountaintops, and I will tell you why. It is an age-old storytelling trope to use proxies. And it's just smart to use proxies for reasons that maybe haven't been thought of by a lot of people who criticize the use of them. And I'll explain why. By choosing to use mythical creatures, it makes the story, or at least the point that racism is bad, it makes that element of the story relatable on a global level. See, in the United States, racism focuses on black people, but this game is sold worldwide. I've actually seen, and I'll probably be mocked for this, but I've actually seen really weird stuff on the internet where British people are somehow racist against Irish people, even though they're both Caucasians. That's outlandish to me. You know, I've been taught that it has to be a different skin color, but there's a lot of prejudice against the Irish. And some of the worst things I've ever heard said about another human in my life were actually British people talking about Irish people, and sometimes vice versa. So, and you may not respect that example, but the point is, racism is different in different parts of the world. In Africa, whether you want to call it racism or not, there are African tribes that are black that end up being very prejudiced and very discriminatory towards other African tribes that are black. When you choose a proxy, when you choose dwarves and elves, you can tell the same story around the world, and it becomes a theme that is universal. And that theme is discrimination is bad. Whereas if you force them to use black people, okay, that's only going to be relevant in certain countries. It's not going to be relevant worldwide. So proxies are actually very effective. Proxies are actually a wise choice to use. And I'll even say this. Proxies make it so that you can play a game that at the end of the day is designed to be entertainment. It is supposed to be fun. On some level, it is supposed to be fun. That is what they are selling, a fantasy, an escape. When you use proxies, you're able to touch very heavy subjects, very dark subjects, very murky and controversial subjects, but you still get to do it in a way where the game is still fun and is still relatable and is still accessible. And it may seem counterproductive to you. It may seem impossible to you even. But a lot of people can actually do a much better job of processing the fact that discrimination is bad when a proxy is used and when it's done in a way that is non-threatening. If some guy in Alabama, who for the sake of argument, let's say he doesn't really like black people, if you want to go along with a stereotype, but if you have a guy in Alabama who pays $60 for this game and goes home and plays it, and you hit him over the head with what a terrible person he is for not liking black people, are you going to get through to him or are you going to alienate him? Now, that is a philosophical debate that could be had. You could argue either way. But I think it really comes down to a situation where you catch more flies with honey than you do vinegar. And I think that if you want to say that discrimination is bad, if you want to say that racism is bad, I think doing it with a non-threatening proxy actually achieves that goal better than hitting people over the head with real life. And that's another thing. It's a $60 game with $25 worth of downloadable content. That's $85. Do people really want to pay $85 to see an exact replica of real life? I don't know that they do. That's part of why fantasy sells. I don't know that. Let me put it to you this way. If the video games that have been criticized for using proxies to discuss racism or not being inclusive enough, not being diverse enough, if these video games were developed by the people who are doing the criticizing, by the Torek Mooses of the world, by the Austin Walkers of the world, by the basically entire staff of Polygon of the world, if they were developing these games, would they still be big sellers? Would they still sell millions upon millions of copies? Would those games reach enough people to be relevant enough to merit a conversation about? I don't know. I'm going to conclude this by saying I think it is very noble and very good to want more diversity in games. I think that's a great thing. I want more diversity in games, if for no other reason than for variety. But also on top of that, I like to see other perspectives. Not Watch Dogs, but Sleeping Dogs. Sleeping Dogs, one of the things that people liked about that game is, and even people from Hong Kong said that they felt like the game did a good job of showing just a glimmer, just a little bit of Hong Kong culture. A lot of people like that. I like that. I want to play games that are fun, where I learn about other cultures. I really do. I have seen white, Caucasian, standard fare, mythology games my entire lifetime. I'm ready for new stuff. Diversity is good. So even if it's just for variety, let alone the fact of human rights or dignity. But yes, inclusion is good. Sensitivity is good. Respect is good. And it's right for people to want those things. But I don't think it's necessarily the right path to take to try to punish companies who don't meet that goal. Because again, to do it authentically, I just don't know that CD Projekt Red was going to authentically put people of color in the game. And it may have done more harm than good. So while it is right and it is fair and it is okay to wish that more people of color or any people of color were in the game, I don't know if that developer was going to do it. And then we've seen BioWare, they've made Dragon Age, and Dragon Age is a different game. Dragon Age has plenty of diversity in it. Does it have enough diversity? I don't know. I'm not an expert on that topic. I don't know because I asked this before, what is the right amount of diversity? I don't know. But BioWare definitely made a more diverse game than CD Projekt Red did. But it's a different game. It's not the same kind of game. There are vastly different game systems at play, a different storytelling path, a different everything. So diversity is good. I want diversity. I like diversity. It's not wrong for other people to want diversity either, but I don't think that the current tone has been productive. I don't think punishing people or shaming them or beating them over the head or saying that you were forced to play as a white person in a game or saying that because a proxy was used, then people of color were dehumanized. I don't think that kind of terminology is healthy. I don't think that's going to get you the outcome that you're looking for. So this has been AI Gaming 1776. My YouTube channel is AI Politics 2. I'm going to try to change that to AI Everything, and I really hope I can. I'm not even well versed enough in how YouTube works to know if I'm going to be able to pull that off. But the goal is for the channel to be called AI Everything because I have a wide range of interests, one of which is harmony among all human beings, for what that's worth. And that's part of why I sat down and recorded this. So thank you for listening, guys. I know this is different. And given the topic, a lot of people, this probably is not going to be their cup of tea, but these are my thoughts. This is where my heart was. This is what I felt like recording. So thank you for listening, and all of you, have a good night.